Hello my RC pilot friends. Today there is something different than usual on this YouTube channel. Instead of full send flying with tiny Whoop FPV race drones, things are a bit more relaxed in this video with this motorized RC paraglider from Stirlingkit. And yes, I tried to fly aerobatics with it. And yes, I crashed. And yes, I also flew this RC paraglider with FPV, very much in the tradition of this YouTube channel. And yes, that was my most boring FPV flight ever. And yes, the lines of a paraglider can get tangled, but in most cases it is quite easy to untangle the lines again, especially if you know how, which I will also show you in this video. And no, folding and unfolding the wing is not difficult. It is much easier and faster than you think. I will also show you that in this video. And no, starting an RC paramotor is not difficult, if you know how. I will also show you that in this video, including my bad starts. And yes, flying a motorized paraglider is something relaxed and may seem a bit boring to some. But paramotor flying also has advantages and capabilities that you will not find in any other aircraft in this combination. I will show you all the pros and cons of a motorized paraglider in this video. I received this RC paraglider from Stirlingkit to test it and show it to you. This video is therefore sponsored by Stirlingkit, but by no means fully funded. I am allowed to say whatever I want. Stirlingkit has given me no guidelines on what I can tell you, and that is why I will tell you everything, the positive and the negative. But let's start from the beginning. Is an RC paramotor the right choice for you? The pros and cons of an RC paramotor. Before we start with the unboxing, I would like to clarify 2 points with you. Basically, a paraglider with a motor is called a paramotor. Some also use the terms motorized paraglider or simply paraglider. In this video, I use all of these terms, but in this case, I always mean a paramotor. What I also want to clarify with you right at the beginning is whether an RC paramotor is the right thing for you, so that you don't have to watch the entire video only to realize afterward that an RC paramotor is not for you. The basic requirement for an RC paramotor to be suitable for you is the willingness to fly in a relaxed and slow flight style. The very low flight speed is also one of the biggest advantages of an RC paramotor, especially for RC flight beginners. After this video, even a complete beginner can fly an RC paramotor. A stall like with an airplane is not possible due to the good ratio of wingspan to weight on this RC paramotor. This is very helpful for beginners who cannot yet judge flight speed very well. Wing collapses are also very rare on this RC paramotor during normal flight. If it does happen, it is not a big problem because the collapsed wing acts as a parachute and cushions the impact on the ground. And even for a harder impact, this RC paramotor from Stirlingkit is equipped accordingly thanks to the Metal Gear servos and the Gondola frame made of tough plastic. Thus, this RC paramotor can hardly crash in the actual sense like an RC airplane can, except, of course, directly after takeoff or during aerobatics close to the ground. More on that later. Another advantage of an RC paramotor is the easy takeoffs and landings. An RC paramotor can be launched and landed almost anywhere. This is also a big advantage compared to RC airplanes. The flight appearance is beautiful and unusual, and the flight time of 20 to 30 minutes is very long. And the best thing is transport. Everything needed for flying can be stored in a small cardboard box. This is the biggest and most extraordinary advantage of an RC paramotor. The transport dimensions are very small, even smaller than those of an RC helicopter of similar size. This makes the RC paraglider probably the most transport-friendly RC aircraft with a wing. Another somewhat unusual advantage is that night flight lighting can be implemented very easily on a paraglider. A few LEDs mounted on the gondola and pointed upward toward the wing, and the RC paramotor can be flown at night if desired. Neutral points of this motorized RC paraglider ready-to-fly kit from Stirlingkit in brief. For some, this RC paramotor may be a bit boring to fly, especially because the speed setting and brakes only work to a limited extent, and the paraglider can basically only fly left and right turns as well as downward spirals. Light aerobatics are possible, but only limited. This RC paramotor from Stirlingkit is aimed more at beginners and budget-conscious pilots. For advanced pilots, the unfortunately very expensive professional paragliders are probably still the best choice. FPV flight with an RC paramotor is possible, but without a gimbal it is very shaky and rather boring. With a 3-axis gimbal and HD video transmission, it might be quite okay. The disadvantages of this motorized RC Paraglider ready-to-fly kit from Stirlingkit in brief are: RC Paragliders are generally not flyable in strong wind, partly because they cannot fly fast, but also because the wing can collapse in strong turbulence. The sound of this RC Paramotor, and of motorized RC Paragliders with a pusher configuration in general, is not particularly nice. And as already mentioned, the brakes in the speed setting have practically no effect on this RC Paraglider. Therefore, this RC Paraglider can only be flown actively to a limited extent. The agility of this paraglider is also limited. Fast direction changes are not its strength. With some experience, it can also be controlled in a tighter airspace if flown predictively and smoothly, but especially for beginners, a very large flying area without obstacles is mandatory. In summary, I can say that this motorized RC Paraglider from Stirlingkit is aimed at beginners who are looking for an affordable entry into RC Paragliding. An RC Paraglider that is simple and quickly becomes fun to fly. In this area, the RC-Paramotor from Stirlingkit delivers solid performance. The ready-to-fly kit is truly ready to fly, apart from the AA batteries for the transmitter. The motorized RC Paraglider from Stirlingkit flies very balanced and safe, which makes it ideal for beginners. For more experienced RC pilots, however, it may become boring fairly quickly, and the desire for more glide performance, more agility, and a real speed bar may arise quite soon. Therefore, my recommendation for pilots who can imagine flying RC Paragliders regularly and actively, even in more challenging weather conditions, is to go straight for professional equipment. That said, I do appreciate that Stirlingkit makes a very affordable entry into RC paragliding possible with this RC Paraglider, even for complete RC beginners. Well done, Stirlingkit. The price to performance ratio is definitely right here. I am sure that after this introduction, you know whether this RC Paramotor from Stirlingkit is the right choice for you. If you decided through this video to buy a paraglider from Stirlingkit, please use the affiliate link in the video description to support this channel and my work for the RC community. With the discount code in the video description of this video, you get an additional 15% discount. That means the price is then about $180. If you would like to learn more about paraglider technology, I recommend the videos from the company Cephix, which I will link in the video description of this video. There you will learn what makes a professional paraglider and what a real speed bar on a paraglider is, and much more. Now I wish you a lot of fun with the rest of this video. Use the chapters to navigate through the video. For example, if you want to go directly to a specific point in the video. We now start right from the beginning with the unboxing and scope of delivery of this ready-to-fly RC Paramotor kit. Unboxing contents of delivery. The motorized paraglider ready-to-fly kit you see here costs about $210 at the time this video was made. With the discount code in the video description of this video, you get an additional 15% discount. That means the price is then about $180. The RC Paraglider ready-to-fly kit includes everything you need for flying, except the AA batteries for the transmitter. But apart from that, everything is included. This includes the user manuals for the transmitter, the charger, and the RC Paraglider, as well as a few spare parts such as replacement control arms and a spare propeller. At least that was the case with my package. What is unfortunately not included in the package is a tool to remove the propeller. I definitely recommend that you bring a tool with you on your first flight in order to replace the propeller if necessary. The LiPo flight battery is a 3-cell, 1500 mAh LiPo with an XT60 connector. The wingspan of the paraglider I received from Stirlingkit is 128 centimeters, or 1280 millimeters. When laid out relaxed on the ground, the canopy is about 120 centimeters because it automatically folds in slightly when lying flat on the ground. When the canopy is in the air, however, the actual wingspan is 128 centimeters. The servos are very likely Metal Gear servos and are very robust. I crashed a few times and nothing broke except the propeller. Make sure you choose the right kit for your needs on the Stirlingkit website. User manuals. There are 2 user manuals included in the kit, one for the transmitter and the RC Paraglider, and a second one for the LiPo charger. The manuals are generally sufficient. but I think a few tips from this video will make getting started much easier for you. Missing screws. On my RC-Paraglider, the two screws that secure the servo arm and the connected control arm to the servo were unfortunately missing. At first, I thought this was intentional so that the control arm could pop off the servo in a crash. But it felt too unsafe to me, so I installed two plastic screws that are intended to act as a predetermined breaking point. Later, Stirlingkit confirmed to me that screws should be installed and that they were probably forgotten in my case. Modifications. Basically, the Paraglider and the Gondola are well built and do not require any mandatory modifications. Personally, however, I do not like it when the antennas of the 2.4 GHz receiver are dangling freely, so I attached the antennas to the Gondola with cable ties. For this, I drilled holes into the frame of the Gondola. In addition, I installed a strain relief for the main cable, also using cable ties. Packing and unpacking the canopy. Unpacking and packing the Paraglider canopy is very easy. It is much easier than expected. With parachutes, this is a bit more difficult, but with paragliders, it is really simple. The only thing you need to pay attention to before packing it up is that you place the many small line branches onto the canopy and pack them together with the canopy so that in the end, only the last few centimeters of the main and control lines are sticking out at the bottom of the folded canopy. Unpacking the canopy. Unpacking the Paraglider canopy is very easy and self-explanatory. There is nothing more to say about it. Anyone can really do it. Choosing the flying field. Thanks to its low speed, a paramotor can generally be flown in a more confined flying area with some experience. But especially for beginners, a very large flying field without obstacles is mandatory. For your first flight, choose a large, walkable field without obstacles. Preparing and switching on the transmitter. Press and hold the power button on the transmitter until it turns on. Elevon must be selected on the transmitter. For paraglider flying, the Elevon mix is required. You must check before the first flight whether this is selected. If it is, then everything is ready for flight. The throttle stick must be all the way down. Otherwise, the brushless motor controller will not arm for safety reasons. The switches on the transmitter have no function for flying the RC-Paraglider. To switch off the transmitter after the flight, simply press and hold the power button again until the transmitter turns off. Do not hold the Gondola by the propeller guard ring. Warning! Do not hold the Gondola by the propeller guard ring. The red propeller guard ring is not a handle. Unfortunately, the red ring strongly invites you to do so. This happened to me once as well, as you can see in the video. I then realized that it is not a good idea to hold the Gondola by the propeller guard ring when the flight battery is still plugged in and the motor can start. This is really dangerous. My model flying friends, please do not do this. Either always unplug the battery immediately or never hold it by the propeller guard ring. In my view, the basic rule of never holding it by the propeller guard ring is the safest. That way, you do not get used to doing something wrong. And always unplugging the battery immediately is of course also a sensible basic rule. The basic control of an RC-Paraglider. When controlling an RC-Paramotor, it is important to know that the throttle does not control the speed like on an RC model airplane, but mainly the climb angle or descent angle, or the rate of climb and rate of descent. The speed increases only slightly with more throttle. Most of the energy then goes into climbing. Therefore, the speed can more or less be considered fixed. The throttle stick on the transmitter is therefore more of a climb and descent control than a speed control. When flying, you therefore use the throttle stick only a little. For this reason, the throttle stick is also set relatively stiff or tight so that it does not move during flight. With the right stick, you can make a left or a right turn. In theory, this paraglider also has a brake and a speed setting, which you can operate with the right stick by pulling it back and pushing it forward. Unfortunately, this has practically no effect on this paraglider, as you will see in a later chapter. When flying a paraglider, it is important that you perform all control movements smoothly. For beginners, it is recommended not to fly rapid changes of direction. A paraglider tends to swing due to its design. After every strong turn, the gondola briefly swings to the other side. With a bit of practice, you can dampen this after swing after a turn by pushing the stick again in the same control direction as when initiating the turn. This is called active paraglider flying. Please watch the videos from the company Cephix, which I have linked in the video description if you want to learn more about active paraglider flying. Pre-flight check. Before the flight, you must check whether the servo and control arms move in the correct direction and whether they are approximately at the same height and centered. This means that if you draw a line from the hole where the control lines are attached to the servo pivot point, this line must be parallel to an imaginary line on the underside of the gondola. Once you have checked everything, including a short motor test run, you can start flying. Directly before every launch, and I really mean before every launch, you must check all the lines again. The best way to do this is from bottom to top. That means you start at the carabiners on the control arms and make sure they are positioned correctly. Then you move on to the carabiners of the main lines and make sure that the green loops of the main lines are correctly hooked in and not wrapped around the carabiner. Finally, you check that the control lines run correctly through the carabiners. What I also recommend checking before every flight are the knots of the control lines. These are only tied twice so that they can be undone again in order to mechanically retrim if necessary. Therefore, the knots should ideally be checked before every flight, or at least before every flying day. Launch attempts, exercises, dry practice before the first launch. Before the first flight, you should do a few launch attempts without actually launching the paraglider in order to practice the launch movement. It is important that you also practice checking the control lines again after each launch attempt. This will later help prevent a failed launch caused by tangled control lines. During the launch attempts, it is important that you pay attention to whether the canopy inflates well and straight. Launching is always done directly and straight into the wind. The decision of whether a launch attempt must be aborted or not has to be made before the highest point of the movement. You must already recognize at that point whether the canopy is inflating at an angle or is too unstable. If this is the case, you can abort the launch attempt with a decisive movement so that the control lines do not twist and the canopy is immediately ready for the next launch attempt. To check whether your launch attempts and decisions are good, you can also let the RC-Paramotor glide to the ground a few times without the motor. If it glides to the ground nicely straight and calmly without swinging, then your launch attempt was good. Once you have managed this a few times, you can move on to powered launches. 2 examples of how not to launch. Here I show you 2 examples of how you should not launch. I did manage to get the RC-Paramotor into the air both times, but definitely not smoothly. It really makes no sense to launch the paramotor without throttle. I hope these 2 examples are enough to show that this makes no sense. It is far too difficult to bring the throttle quickly enough to exactly the right position. It is better to start with the same throttle position from the beginning. Once you have figured out which position is the right one for the paramotor to climb away gently in a shallow climb. In most cases, this is about 1 notch before the center or exactly in the center on the gimbal grid of the transmitter. How to correctly launch an RC-Paramotor. To correctly launch an RC-Paramotor, you must start with a bit of throttle directly and straight into the wind. You can find the ideal throttle position for your RC-Paramotor through a few launch attempts. In most cases, the correct throttle position is about 1 notch before the center or directly in the center on the gimbal grid of the transmitter. The throttle position is the same position as the neutral flight position. That means the same as when you fly your paraglider straight ahead in calm conditions without climbing or descending significantly. With this correct throttle position, you can now launch the RC-Paramotor very easily. This works best for right-handed people if you hold the paraglider in your right hand and the transmitter in your left hand. If you did everything right during the launch, you will then have plenty of time to hold the transmitter with both hands. There is no reason to rush. The launch of an RC paramotor can be divided into 5 steps: checking the control lines, setting the throttle to the correct position, inflating the paraglider with air, raising the paraglider, and releasing the paraglider at the launch point. The launch point is defined by the RC paramotor being exactly in the flight position. It is important that at this moment, only the gondola is almost at the highest point, while the paraglider is still slightly behind it. Releasing the RC paramotor too early or too late causes swinging or a canopy collapse. It is also important that the gondola is always aligned with the paraglider. Otherwise, the gondola can start swinging, which is amplified by the thrust of the propeller and weakens the forward thrust to the point where the paramotor can no longer stay airborne. With a bit of practice, almost every launch will eventually succeed, and over time you will learn to better judge when you need to abort a launch attempt. Please always start your RC paramotor with the transmitter in one hand. I only did the starts here in the video without the transmitter in my hand to demonstrate how easy the launch can be with a properly trimmed paramotor and the correct throttle setting. First flight. Apart from my poor but still just barely sufficient first launch, the first flight went smoothly. Using the trim on the transmitter, I was able to trim the paraglider so that it flew almost straight. More on this in the next chapter. Unfortunately, there was a bit of wind that day. The good thing about this RC paraglider is that thanks to its weight, it can still be flown despite a little wind. My first RC paraglider was much smaller and lighter, with a 2S setup, and therefore very susceptible to wind and canopy collapses. With this RC paraglider from Stirlingkit, however, this is not a problem. Of course, this paraglider also flies better when there is no wind, but it can be flown well even in light wind. As you can see, paragliding is a very relaxed activity. Ideal for pilots who want to use RC flying to relax and simply enjoy watching the paraglider move majestically through the air. If you manage to appreciate the paraglider for what it is and what it can do, you will be very happy flying an RC paraglider. Trimming. In some cases, the trim on the transmitter is not sufficient to fully trim the paramotor so that it flies perfectly straight. In this case, you need to mechanically trim the paramotor. That means you have to remember on which side you need to shorten or lengthen the control line. After the first flight, reset the trim on the transmitter back to the center. Then undo the knot of the control line on the corresponding side and retie the line shortened or lengthened. After a few test flights, you will find the correct setting. Once the mechanical adjustment is roughly correct, you can do the fine adjustment using the trim on the transmitter. The rule here is, the more accurate the mechanical basic setting is, the better. Attempt at a loop and crash. After the warm-up flight, I tried to do a loop and quickly realized that this is difficult with a paraglider. If at all, it would have to be initiated over one side, with a prior swinging from one side to the other and back and so on. But the way I tried it definitely does not work, as you can clearly see. It was really the completely wrong approach. The paraglider must always be slightly behind the gondola and must never come in front of it. My paraglider therefore had no other choice than to eventually collapse. The nice thing about an RC paraglider is that it always carries a parachute. Even if the canopy collapses, it still acts like a parachute and reduces the fall speed, so that usually nothing breaks when crashing onto soft ground like a field or freshly plowed soil. Unfortunately, this very often results in very dirty shoes, as you can see in the next chapter. Anyone who watches this chapter is a malicious, joy-loving bastard. Anyone who has been in the RC flying hobby for a longer time knows it. The long walk of shame into a wet, muddy field. That's RC life, my friends. Dirty shoes are simply part of this hobby. Who doesn't know it? The greatest comfort is knowing that the same thing will happen to all RC pilots sooner or later. Shared pain is half the pain. pathetic cleaning attempt after the crash. Ideally, you should take a brush with you on your first flight, for example, an old worn-out toothbrush. With it, you can clean the dirt off the gondola again. Unfortunately, this time I did not have the toothbrush that I usually always carry with me. So I had to try to clean the gondola as best as possible with my fingers and with grass. I made a big mistake in the process. I forgot to unplug the LiPo battery. That was really not smart. Please always unplug the battery before you do anything on the gondola. Untangling the lines after a crash. The lines get tangled much less often than I initially thought, and if they do, it is easy to free the gondola from the lines again. What is important is that you pause briefly and think before doing anything, and then thread the gondola back through the lines at the correct spot. With a bit of common sense, this is possible for anyone. I think if you crash onto hard, flat ground where the gondola flips over several times, it is more likely that the gondola will get more severely tangled in the lines. But with a crash into a field, this will hardly be the case. In any case, I was positively surprised by how rarely the lines get tangled. Sometimes the gondola also flips between the lines during a landing, especially on hard ground. The lines then twist evenly on both sides. This is sometimes difficult to see. In theory, the paramotor can also be flown with such twisted lines, but over time, the paramotor becomes increasingly difficult to control. Therefore, always check before every flight whether the lines have twisted. To fix this, you can simply rotate the gondola back until the lines are completely free again and the control line runs directly through the main carabiner toward the canopy. In the video clips you can see here, the lines are twisted once again. As far as I remember, the paraglider arrived like that. However, I think it is better if the control lines are completely free and run directly through the main carabiner to the trailing edge of the canopy. That is how I flew in the end, and I had no problems with it. Second flight with aerobatics. I think the only aerobatic maneuver this RC paraglider can perform is a steep spiral. To initiate such a steep spiral, you simply make a steep turn and hold it. Exiting the maneuver probably works best by slowly reducing the throttle and slowly bringing the aileron stick back to the center. Shortly before the end of the recovery turn, you can briefly push the stick again to the same side you used to initiate the turn in order to dampen the swinging. If you do all of this slowly, a clean exit from this maneuver should be possible. glide flight. Gliding without the motor works perfectly. Who would have thought that? Now I also know why it is called a paraglider. But jokes aside, I would not have thought that a paraglider glides so well. The glide rate was quite okay for a free-spinning propeller. That means slope soaring might also be possible under ideal conditions, that is, with not too much and not too little slope wind. Thermal flying should definitely also be possible, even if this paraglider is certainly not the best for it. Under good conditions, it should be quite possible to gain altitude in a thermal. FPV flight with an FPV camera. To fly the RC-Paraglider with an FPV camera, I built a small platform from a wooden angle on which I mounted the camera video transmitter combo. I supplied power via a free channel on the receiver that provides 5 volts. For this, I had to solder an adapter cable. Flying with an FPV camera is possible, but rather boring. Honestly, this was the most boring FPV flight I have ever done. However, I can imagine that it would be more exciting with HD video transmission and a 3-axis gimbal that compensates for the shaking. And with head tracking, you can then look up, down, left, and right. That makes the whole thing a bit more immersive and exciting. If FPV flying with a paraglider, then like this. With a fixed analog camera, it is definitely too boring. Maybe it would be okay for slope soaring or thermal soaring, where you are busy with updrafts and searching for thermals. But even there, the side-to-side swinging of the gondola would annoy me in the long run. Flaps and speed setting. Now we come to the part that was a bit disappointing for me with this RC-Paraglider. I was really looking forward to the flaps and speed function on this RC-Paraglider, since my first RC-Paraglider did not have this function. Unfortunately, however, the flaps and speed function have practically no effect on this paraglider, as you can hopefully see clearly in this video. That was, admittedly, a bit frustrating. I then learned that only professional paragliders have what is known as a real accelerator, a speed function that actually works. Perhaps on this paramotor, one could retie the lines and at least improve the flap function somewhat. But honestly, that is not really the point. So I simply accepted that the flaps and speed function on this RC Paraglider, if anything, only work very limitedly, and I no longer used the function much. The good thing is that this function is not strictly necessary anyway, and if you want this function, you have to buy a professional RC Paraglider of higher quality, which then is also quickly twice as expensive. I personally will probably buy such a professional RC Paraglider for myself at some point. Nevertheless, I am still grateful that I was able to rediscover paragliding with this RC Paramotor from Stirlingkit and deepen my knowledge. Flying with smaller flight batteries. Flying with smaller and lighter flight batteries is possible. I even flew the RC Paramotor with 3-cell 800 mAh LiPos. However, this makes the paraglider more unstable and more susceptible to external influences such as wind, and with too much throttle, a kind of canopy stall is possible, causing it to collapse. This was not possible with the original, heavier flight battery. The advantage of a smaller and lighter flight battery is that the paraglider can be flown even more slowly. Overall, I can say that flying with other batteries is possible, but only recommended for experienced pilots and in little or no wind. In theory, you can of course also use a smaller flight battery with additional ballast so that the total weight is the same as with the large original flight battery. That is also an option if, for example, you already have many small LiPo batteries that you would like to use. Landing. Landing with the paraglider is very easy and is one of its strengths. It is possible to take off and land almost anywhere with a paraglider because it flies slowly and lands slowly. To land, you simply give less and less throttle, and shortly before the gondola touches the ground, you fully reduce the throttle. If possible, it is recommended to land on medium-high grass, which cushions the impact and prevents the gondola from rolling. This way, the lines twist less during landings. Packing the canopy. Packing the RC Paraglider is quite self-explanatory. The only thing you need to pay attention to before packing is to lay the many small line branches onto the canopy and pack them together with the canopy, so that in the end, only the last few centimeters of the main and control lines are sticking out at the bottom of the folded canopy. And if you landed the paraglider on a damp meadow, you must either let it dry before packing it or unpack it again at home and dry it. Otherwise, there is a risk of mold. Ideas for what else you can do with the RC Paraglider. For me personally, the main use cases of the RC Paraglider are slope flying in ridge lift and thermal flying, and perhaps also flying from special locations where you can only take off and land with an RC Paraglider. In theory, flying at night would also be possible for those who want to do that. Since the gondola always hangs below the canopy, a few LEDs pointing toward the canopy would be sufficient to illuminate it for twilight or night flying. And if you have enough spare cash, you could mount an FPV system with HD video transmission and a 3-axis gimbal, as well as head tracking. Another use case of this RC Paramotor, in my view, is teaching other people how to fly RC aircraft. Final conclusion. As you have hopefully seen in this video, this RC Paramotor ready-to-fly kit from Stirlingkit is ideally suited as a low-cost, almost indestructible, and space-saving entry into RC model flying. In my view, it is even better than an RC model airplane. The glide performance, the speed function, and the effectiveness of the brake flaps are of course not on the level of a professional RC paraglider, which however also costs more than 3 times as much. From my point of view, the price-to-performance ratio of this RC Paramotor from Stirlingkit is definitely very good. If you know what you are getting, you will have a lot of fun with this RC Paraglider from Stirlingkit. And I hope you now know that after carefully watching this video, I hope I was able to convey all the pros and cons of this RC Paramotor, as well as provide instructions for as successful an entry as possible into RC Paramotor flying. If, through this video, you have decided to buy a paraglider from Stirlingkit, then please use the affiliate link in the video description to support this channel and my work for the RC community. With the discount code in the video description of this video, you will also get a 15% discount. That means the price is then about $180. If you greatly appreciate my work, you can financially support this YouTube channel on ko-fi.com. You can also find the link to that in the video description. Now, I wish you a lot of fun flying RC Paramotors. If you buy an RC Paramotor from Stirlingkit, please give me feedback in the comments of this video after your first flights. I would be happy to hear from you.